Well, about these after-dinner chats. The conversation started at dinner parties that I hosted first in Sydney, Singapore, Dubai, Shanghai, and now London, basically wherever I'm working. Dinners are always fun, sometimes useful, and for me it's been a way over the years to get to know many fabulous people who are always a little bit senior, a little bit fun, a little bit smarter and brighter and shinier than most. So today, Philippa White, who used to be my housemate, is joining me for an after-dinner chat. So she was my housemate many moons ago in London, and since then she's launched a career in Adland, quit that career to move to Brazil and launched her business, which is now called Thai Leadership. And I'm sure we'll talk about that and about her first book, the critically acclaimed Return on Humanity. She'll be back in town for a dinner party this September. So if you're in London and want to join us for that dinner party, let us know and we'll try and make space at the table. Till then, see what you think of this chat.
This episode is brought to you by jobsandadtech.com, the only jobs board dedicated to digital media and the adtech industry. If you're hiring now, use promo code JWPOD, JWPOD, for a 10% discount on any package. Jobsandadtech.com, it's where adtechers go to find their next role.
Philippa, lovely to see you. I'm going to launch straight in, if I may.
Please do. Hi, James. I love that we're doing this.
So do I. So what's been in the news this week that's caught your eye and why?
Well, I wouldn't say it's this week. I would say that it's a couple of weeks ago, just because, leave it to me to do a little bit of a curveball. But as you know, I wrote a book called Return on Humanity, and I talk a lot about the power of these human competencies and human skills. And I think sometimes people get a little bit confused, not confused, but they think that being more human, or these softer skills, if you want to call them, or the power skills, makes you soft, or makes you perhaps not as good of a leader. It's sort of a little bit too wishy-washy. And I think of the conversation with Mark Carney and Trump, and I love that conversation, because the way that Mark just composed himself, he was not there to fight. He was not there to create a problem. He was not going to be a pushover. He was going to represent Canada, and he was going to represent every single person in that country. But he did it with so much just what's even the word? Just, it was so composed, and it was decorum.
Decorum is the word I like for him.
And I just think when Trump was all over the place saying all these ridiculous things, which everyone's seen it, so I don't need to repeat myself or repeat him. But the fact, it was just the last few words that, when Mark just said, well, where we are, is that for sale? Where we're sitting right now, is that for sale? And it was humor in there, right? So he's sort of funny. He sort of held his own. And then he said, Buckingham Palace, is that for sale? He said, yeah, there's something. And then Trump was sort of taken off guard. And he said, and he didn't want to humiliate Trump. So this was not about humiliation. It was just making a point in a funny way. But it was holding his own. And then he said, Canada's never going to be for sale, ever. But what we do need to do is we need to find a way to actually have a relationship. And that's why I'm here. And I just thought that is what a return on humanity is. It's being composed. It's about limits. I mean, you don't need to be a pushover. If anything, you can't be a pushover. But it's being forceful, it's being fair, but it's also being human. And I thought that represented it beautifully. So I love that interview.
And nothing to do with the fact that you're a proud Canadian.
I am. I was born. I am British as well. I have a British passport. I was born in South Africa, but I also hold a Canadian passport proudly. And for the first time since the pandemic, we're finally able to go back this next month, which is very exciting. So, yeah.
Proper global citizen with your business in the UK and sitting right now. Where are you?
Right. So I've lived in Brazil for 20 years, which is a crazy number, because actually it's the longest I've lived anywhere, which is bonkers. I mean, how is it that I'm now living in Brazil and it's the longest I've lived anywhere else, even in Canada? So
Don't tell anyone. We're getting older. So you mentioned your book, Return on Humanity. The theme going through these interviews has been helping people get ripped off less, which is a fairly trite way of just saying, I think we can help people get more bang for their buck. I love the fact that your book, the cover is ROI with the I/out and the H on top. Tell me more about what your business is doing and how that book is intrinsically linked with the business.
Yeah, that's such a nice question. And I think the way that I kind of explain it is I, for 20 years, have been developing the human competencies. And I'll define that very quickly, which, it is these, I'm going to call them the power skills that unfortunately business hasn't kind of seen as being that important, hopefully until now. But, it's the power of vulnerability and flexibility and cultural intelligence and kindness and empathy. And these are the skills that I've been developing in a number of different ways, but through experiential leadership development. And the book has finally found an interesting way to kind of lift the lid on the secret sauce. And I like to think that it brings to life through stories. I've written it through stories to try and make it accessible. And it is not a sell at all for what I do. I give some examples of what I do, but it's more just to bring to life the power of what happens when you tap into these skills. And I'm going to give it an example because I like, what you're focusing on, which is being ripped off less. And I don't know if your listeners have read the book, Never Split the Difference. I cannot recommend it enough, and I hope you put it in the show notes. It's written by Chris, can't remember his what's his last name? Can't remember his last name. But anyway, Never Split the Difference. Have a look at it. It's a negotiation book, and he used to be the head hostage negotiator for the FBI. And he uses all of these soft skills, which according to business are, they're not really that important. We need to focus on, competition and beating the other person and trying to sort of outdo people. And if you read his book, you're going to see that the only way that you can properly negotiate both hostages or kidnappers or, to get, hostages away from kidnappers or intense situations in any country around the world. So it can be in the Philippines, it can be in New York, some bank being held up, or it can be a negotiation for a business. But the skills are exactly the same, and it's tapping into these human competencies. And so the question is, how do you develop these? Because I think from my point of view, to put up a PowerPoint slide and tell someone that it's really important to be empathetic, and then perhaps put the definition of being empathetic there on that PowerPoint slide, and then maybe just explain in some kind of way what that looks like. It's very hard to imagine that person would properly, intrinsically, sort of within their essence, truly understand what that means. And in my view, what you need to do is you need to have like a shift change in someone for them to actually viscerally understand what it means when you have it and what it means when you don't have it. Things like vulnerability, having really top leaders understanding what it means to say, I don't know. I actually don't know. And I think I need to find out. It's not very often when someone's in a really powerful position that they can honestly bring themselves to do that. But actually, we find that the more and more people are able to do that, the more powerful they are as leaders. So through my work, which is, we do it in a number of different ways now, but it is about really tapping into self-awareness, tapping into this concept of interdependence. So we need other people to be able to find solutions to things, and interconnectedness. We're all connected. And I do it by exposing people to completely different experiences around the world that takes them completely out of their normal silo and day-to-day way of thinking and forces them to see themselves in the world from a totally different point of view. And as a result, we create that shift change and behavior change.
So Philippa, you're saying it happens in a few different guises. Give us an example, because not everybody knows the international exchange. So tell us an example of an early example of where you took somebody out of an ad agency, say, and then the more recent ones that you launched during the pandemic.
Yeah. So, and actually, interestingly, and you probably don't even know this. So it was the International Exchange. It's still Thai, but we don't even go by that anymore. We've done a whole new thing since the pandemic. It's now Thai leadership, and it's very much focused on leadership, whereas before it was more focused on that exchange opportunity. So before the pandemic, what we did was we did one thing. What we did was we took mostly communication people at the beginning, but then we expanded out and we had a number of different people from a number of different businesses. Octopus Group was one of our clients. So we would send a professional from financial services or from Adland or from some marketing company, and they would go to a completely different place around the world. They would have 30 days to crack a challenge. They would have to work with people that they've never worked with before, in an environment they've never been in before, sometimes speaking a language that they've never spoken before, and constraints are at the core. The obstacle is the way, necessity is the mother of invention, and oh my God, we need to figure out a solution with this, which is very little. And it's pretty amazing what came out. It was extraordinarily powerful to, improve people's confidence, suddenly realizing that they knew more than they thought they did, and then tapping into these competencies of, wow, empathy, what happens when I actually try and understand someone else, or vulnerability, being able to say, I don't know, cultural intelligence, being able to get people who are so completely different to who you are to, connect with you. Those are skills that you have to tap into. And if you don't learn how to do that, and you just keep living and breathing in that silo that you live in, it's hard to be able to create those, bridges. Anyway, the pandemic happened, blew up my company, was probably one of the most challenging things I've ever had to deal with. But necessity is the mother of invention, and we managed to, evolve. So now it's extraordinary. We're doing everything from, now virtual cohorts. So we have the same sort of idea. We've got one live right now with Leo Burnett. So it's a virtual cohort, a group of sort of 6 people coming together from around a business, cracking a challenge. This particular one is in Zambia. You've got people from around the business working together to be able to crack a challenge, but they have to, work together. They've got a time limit. They need to understand about a whole new area that they never even knew about before. But we also do, I'm launching now a really big piece of work with a dairy brand. And this is, it can touch 500 people around a business. It's doing it in a different way, but it's still exposing people to completely different realities. And from an innovation point of view, getting people to see the world and other areas just outside of this silo that they're so familiar with, and getting people from around a business to come together to think differently, work together, and see themselves and their leadership in a different way. So super powerful and super, super exciting. And we're also going to do a bit of the cohort stuff with them as well, which is great. And then offsites. So I'm off to San Diego. Going to be doing a workshop for a massive technological brand. Then Las Vegas, doing another offsite with them. So it's quite varied. So we do everything from sort of, offsites, workshops, and, 500 plus training, to cohorts, to one individual. We've got BBH, who is going to be sending someone to Brazil. Yeah, she's coming to Brazil in September, which is super cool. So lots of things.
I love how you've reinvented it when you needed to, and kept it going, and kept the enthusiasm and the excitement about it going at all times. I'd like to round off, if I may, with a high five at the end. So I'm going to ask you five quick fire questions, and you can just tell me who these people are and your answers to these questions. So your hero, who is your hero?
Oh my God, my hero. I would say my uncle. And I talk about my uncle in my book, but I think he was just the epitome of what it means to, have that fascination with perspective and possibility, and cross borders, and, expand silos. And
tell us a moment about what he did and for whom.
Yeah, so he was Nelson Mandela's doctor that moment when he came out of prison and started negotiations with the apartheid government. So he needed to have a doctor to be with him to ensure that he was okay, because if he died, it would have been a civil war. It would have been awful. So, but he wasn't that person because he was some rich, powerful white doctor of South Africa. It was actually the total opposite. He was the most humble, understated, quiet, person that they just got on really well. They were friends and they had similar interests, and he trusted him. And but that was my uncle. And actually, he didn't even talk about that. I'm the one who talks about it. He's obviously since passed away. But what he was so proud about, which is even more impressive, is that, and this is, I'll very quickly sort of summarize it, but because of the mining in South Africa and because of apartheid was brought to, made happen because of the mining. And basically, for a long time, Black people's lungs were considered different to white people's lungs. And as a result, they didn't get compensation when they got seriously ill from being underground with asbestos and all these. So my uncle gave his entire life, every night he would get home and he would be looking at x-rays, and he fought the system to prove that these individuals needed to have compensation from the government and that they needed to crack down on the situation in the mines. And he was doing it until literally weeks before he died. And there's a documentary made about him, and he was one of the most incredible people that just didn't accept the system for the way that it was and knew that it was wrong and did everything in his power to change that. And that's why he's one of the most inspirational people.
You mentioned him at your book launch, and he was one of the reasons why I was excited to get into the book and learn a little bit more about him. Okay, I'm going to carry on. Your best decision, if I may.
My best decision, it's crazy. And at the time, I remember people saying to me, "You're crazy. You should not be doing this. You're making a big mistake to quit my job and move to Brazil and set this up." And I was so naive. But I'm happy that I was naive, because at least it worked out. But it was a bit crazy. And the people who were a little bit more life savvy were saying that it was a bad decision. But I'm happy I listened to my intuition. So,
your worst decision?
Oh, that's can't talk about that publicly. But there's a worst decision, 100%. So I need to find the other worst decision. The worst is, God, you know what? I actually don't know if even that one's not bad in the sense that, because great things happen as a result of it. Worst decision. I think any bad decision is kind of saying no to something when you can probably grow from it. And I can't think of an example, but I would just say that anything that you've sort of failed at or anything that hasn't worked out probably wasn't the worst decision, because amazing things have come out and you've probably grown as a result of it. So.
I love that turnaround reframing of the question. Funniest moment?
So I actually, funnily enough, was asked this recently in an interview, and I'm going to say this as well, just because there's also a learning from it. It probably wasn't the funniest moment, but I laugh about it now with my daughter. And it was totally bonkers that I did it. But short story, I'd been in Brazil probably around 3 years, and the car that I had at the time was not a fancy car. I still don't drive a fancy car. I've never driven a fancy car. But anyway, the grandfather of my kids has a few very fancy cars, which I'd never really been in one of these fancy cars. And anyway, so apparently when you're in one of these fancy cars and you close the door, literally immediately it locks, which mine didn't do that. The one I have now does, but it takes a little bit longer. But this one, literally, you closed it and it locks. I did not have experience with such incredible technology. So we were on holiday. My daughter was strapped into her car seat, and I had the key in my, the key in my hand, and I was sort of juggling all these things. So I just left it on the handrest because I was sort of doing things to then go around the other side to open the door, then get in, and then drive down to the beach. So I just left it on this handrest. I was like, whatever, I'll just close the door and get it in. But as I was closing the door, my intuition was like, this is a very bad idea. But anyway, I did it. And of course, immediately, everything closed. And she was inside, and it was 30 degrees. And it was just getting hotter. And she was there looking at me, and I'm looking at her. But what was insane, so she was 2.5. And she'd never even taken her arms out of the thing before. And I had to quickly, because it was, this was a very fancy car. Also, he lives in Sao Paulo, so it's probably bulletproof as well. I didn't even know if I'd be able to break it. And we're in the middle of nowhere at a beach.
Oh, the stress kicking in. I can feel it.
Yeah. So, but anyway, I cannot actually believe it. But because she was wearing one of those towel kind of hoodie kind of jacket things over top of her bathing suit, she had a little bit of extra space. So long story short, she managed to sort of undo it. She couldn't figure out what was going on. She's like, just open the door. just open, like, why don't you just open the door, Mummy? And then she could, and I couldn't get her to freak out, because if she freaked out, like, nothing would happen. So I'm like, no, we're playing a game. It's going to be amazing. Anyway, so she managed to get her arms out. And then luckily she reached forward, didn't drop the key. And I mean, she'd never even touched one of these things. And you had to do it twice to open the door. And then she did it. And then we got her out.
Well, you're only telling it as one of the funniest moments. Otherwise, it would have been up there with the worst decision.
But it was, I think, just the learning from it, which I talk about, and I talk about in my book. But what I think is just phenomenal is when you give people space, and when you actually give people an opportunity to step into a place, so many times they totally just blow your mind, and you don't realize just how capable people are. And I think as leaders, we just need to remember that. I think a lot of people just try and sort of own way too much stuff and just don't pass on enough stuff to people. And I think, I think we can.
My final question is introduction to one more person, and it's a bit cheeky to ask that because you've already introduced me to a bunch of fabulous people by bringing them along to dinners along the way. But if there's one more person I should be asking onto the podcast, who would that be? And or to a dinner, who would that be and why?
Oh gosh, who should you bring on, and who would be able to? Oh my gosh, you know what? I've actually got an amazing friend, Juliana Xavier. She's somebody who was a beta reader for my book. She has been working for Yada International, which is as a brander, like branding, but Yada is a fertilizer. It's an international fertilizing company. They are actually the ones that created the fertilizer for the 1930s to increase food. And she used to work at Leo Burnett. She is Brazilian, but she lives in Norway now, and she's a firecracker, and she's so interesting, and she's just at a really interesting moment in her life, and she's got amazing stories. So I think she would be fantastic.
Philippa, thank you. That's been really lovely to catch up with you.
Thank you. Sorry, my glasses are fogging up. It's so hot here, and I get really excited. So anyway, thank you. Thank you for having me.